Hello, it's Tom here. We've got a brilliant episode of Last Orders for you today, but before we get into that, I just want to quickly remind you all about Spiked supporters. This is our thriving donor community for those of you who give to Spiked regularly. So now those who give £5 or more each month or £50 or more each year can get exclusive perks. You can comment on articles, you can get discounts on all items in our shop, and you can get free and discounted tickets to Spiked events. So if you'd like to come along to any of our upcoming events, which we'll be announcing soon, and you're not already a Spiked supporter, then why not sign up today? Just go to spiked-online.com/supporters to find out more and to sign up. Once again, that's spiked-online.com/supporters. Thanks so much. And now on with the show. Welcome to Last Orders, a Spiked podcast. This is the show all about freedom, the nanny state, censorship, and whatever else is irritating us in the news each month. Today we discuss Britain's fuel crisis, the clampdown on gambling, and Joe Biden's Potemkin presidency. Hello and welcome to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater and I'm joined, as I am every month, by Chris Snowdon from the IA. Hello, Chris. How are you doing?
Hello, Tom. You certainly are.
There we go. And we're delighted to be joined today by Freddy Gray. Freddy is the deputy editor of the Spectator. First time on this podcast.
First time on this podcast.
Thank you very much.
Great pleasure to be here.
So we're going to start off by talking about the big issue of the week before Keir Starmer's electrifying conference speech, but it was the fuel crisis, of course. So over the course of the past week, partly because of this shortage in heavy goods vehicle drivers, but largely because of all of this panic buying, we've seen all these scenes of people queuing up for hours just to be able to fill up. People, taking matters into their own hands with their billy cans and all the rest of it. And you, Chris, being a libertarian, of course, use this as an opportunity to defend price gouging in times of crisis. So do you want to tell us your take on all of this and why price gouging would have been the way out of all
Price gouging gets a very bad rap, a bit like sweatshops, but that's something for another day.
We've got a whole special episode coming up.
How did it start? I don't fully remember how it started, to be perfectly honest with you, but there was this talk of there's not enough HGV drivers, which is true, and therefore there is a danger that we will have, not as much fuel as we would like. And the government pretty quickly came out and said, no, don't worry about this. So long as you don't believe there's a crisis, there will not be a crisis. Basically, it's like this could snowball, so let's not let it snowball. Take it easy. If you don't need petrol, don't rush to the petrol stations. It was a carbon copy, really, of the there is no shortage of toilet roll thing 18 months ago. But because people believed that there was a shortage, or very quickly would be a shortage, they rushed out and started queuing up for petrol. And my solution would be for the petrol station owners to follow their own economic interests and whack the price up quite a bit. And if they'd done that on Saturday, then the people who really needed petrol, people whose tanks are empty and had to use it that day or maybe Monday, they would have had to pay a bit more, and that's a shame, but there would have been petrol available for everybody and they wouldn't have to queue up for 4 hours to get it. And the people who didn't really need petrol, they just heard on the grapevine that there was some urgent need to queue up for petrol, they would have gone, well, it's £2 a litre now, I think I'll wait. And it would have come down very quickly through normal competition. And by now, or by Monday or Tuesday, the price would have gone down and equilibrium would have been restored. And I think it's interesting to ask why they didn't do that. Why didn't the petrol stations do it? Because they could have easily got away with it. I can only assume it's due to sort of fear of being slagged off, really, which they were, because a relative handful of petrol stations did put the price up, and the Daily Mail ran with the headline, "How can they profit from misery?" or something like that. It was like literally the front page headline. And politicians would have got involved and say, this is criminal. What about poor people? What about NHS frontline staff who need to get to work and all this kind of stuff? And the bottom line is, it's perfectly reasonable to be concerned about those people, which is why we want them to have petrol, right? And in a way, it's the problems of communism at a kind of micro level. This is one of the main reasons communism failed, is because for the sake of wanting everybody to have things at a so-called fair price, you create shortages and everybody has to queue up for things. It's a very, very similar situation, very similar reasons behind it. That's my take on it.
Before getting into communism, I want to ask about the role of the media in all of this, Freddie, because it seemed like a pretty modest problem, a serious problem, but a relatively modest one, until you started seeing every media outlet putting up the picture of the pump saying we've got no more petrol and all the rest of it, and really kind of bringing about a lot of the panic buying that we're talking about. Do you think the media has some share of the blame in all of this?
Always keen to blame the media as a self-hating journalist. Obviously, we're to blame, but I actually think in the age of social media, it's everyone's to blame. I mean, we seem to have people love panic buying. Basically, you realise that over the lockdown, people actually get a kick out of just talking about how they have to panic buy stuff. I think there's a sort of lust for the apocalypse. There's a lust for a dark winter, partly to justify fears about Brexit, possibly, and also there's this sort of love of sharing these viral videos of fights in petrol forecourts.
They are good, to be fair.
They are. They're good. They're
got
not
a bit tasty with that one with the knife. There
was one with a knife.
There was one with a knife. That was when the laughing stops.
I've not seen that one because I was still laughing. Because I thought the ones I saw were bizarrely quite civilized. You know, there's like a little bit of scrapping, and then there was one that went mental early on. That like, at the end they shake hands afterwards. You see that?
I didn't see that.
And I thought, that's not like, you know, that's not end days.
We're still a great country.
But yeah, I think obviously, you know, media stoke it. It's not as big a crisis as it seems to be at the moment. I do think there is. I mean, I think, like, you know, Brexiteers go, it's nothing to do with Brexit. You know, driver shortages all over Europe. It's obviously partly Brexit. You know, it's like a combination of things are coming together to put a squeeze on prices, and it could get quite severe. It could get quite bad. But what I find extraordinary is this absolute lust for it that you see, not just among the media, among, you know, all my WhatsApp groups of just my friends, just, you know, sort of forwarding each other bollocks about, you know, shortages. And you just think, why does everyone want it?
It does seem like, especially after Brexit, there's no such thing as just a short-term logistical problem anymore. This is all just an example of the end times brought about by the idiocy of this proto-fascist government in the most extreme forms. But Chris, what do you make of the Brexit part of this in particular? Because the Remainers predictably are running around trying to suggest that this is what you get, despite the fact that, as Freddie was saying, unless Brexit also caused the shortages in America and France and Germany and Spain. It's clearly part of the reason, but can anyone really claim it's a big part of the reason?
I don't know is the answer. It is definitely part of the reason, though. And I don't know what the shortages are like in America, but they're pretty severe in this country and have been. You know, you compare the number of HGV drivers in 2019 to now, there's a big drop, right? And that drop happened after 2019. And of course, we've had COVID, and that's, you can't get away from that. And of course, that has led to people leaving the country and not being able to come back, let alone wanting to come back in many cases. So I don't think anyone really knows to what extent it's been caused by Brexit. But we can't deny that this is one of the problems of not Brexit per se, but of the government's immigration policy post-Brexit. It doesn't need to have the immigration policy it's got. I heard Kwasi Kwarteng saying that people on furlough should take these jobs. I mean, what's he talking about? I mean, you've got to have an HGV license. I know the government is now cutting corners on what you need to do to get an HGV license, and obviously that will end well.
The idea that you could just bring the army in tomorrow and it'd be absolutely.
It's always the army, isn't it? It always comes back to anything. It's like with the NHS, with the COVID things, like we're going to bring the army in.
Or prisoners. Let's break them out of prison. And get them driving lorries.
Unfortunately, still a bit politically toxic.
Can we train the army to drive HGVs? They can drive large vehicles. Maybe that's sensible. I don't know. But look, I mean, it is partly to do with Brexit, and we will continue to see these problems. We have. I don't want to sound like bloody James O'Brien, but we genuinely have seen fruit and vegetables rotting in the fields this summer, and that is because there isn't enough stuff there. And if you have a system that says we're going to, I mean, I don't even know what the bloody system is. It's supposed to be something to do with points and all this kind of thing. I mean, really, insofar as people voted for Brexit on grounds of immigration, is because they thought that the UK government should be able to stop Romanian pickpockets coming in. They didn't, I don't think, want to stop fruit pickers coming in and HGV drivers coming in. But effectively, that's what the government's done with its immigration policy. You can't blame Brexit per se for that. You can say that the government was allowed to do that because of Brexit, which is a slightly different thing.
I think we should move on to someone who hasn't had a particularly good crisis or been able to impact himself on the debate at all, which for Keir Starmer is kind of par for the course at the moment, Freddie. So he gave his big speech today. One of his really terrible jokes was levelling up. You can't even fill up, which is quite interesting.
Strong.
So why, in the midst of all of this, this is like the third crisis in as many weeks, it feels like, but still he can't manage to make that point that this is a ramshackle government doesn't know what he's doing land at all.
He's a rubbish politician. He's really, really bad. I mean, this should be absolute prime time for him to he could lean left and go strong. He could carry on it. He could go strong in a sort of Blairite sense against Brexit. He could be strong now, and he's just not. He's not a compelling speaker. He's not a particularly compelling thinker, as we saw from his essay last week. He's a terrible, terrible politician. And I sort of knew this because a lot of very sort of in Tory journalists for a long time talked about what a brilliant threat he was for ages. And that just meant they knew how rubbish he was. And if they could just get him in, he would be a disaster. I think, he perfectly doesn't answer any of the questions that Labour needs to answer. I do feel sorry for him. It's obviously a difficult position. And Labour are starting to become, with their sort of, you see at the conference with the extreme wokery and the sort of insanity about cervixes and so on, that he is trying to run a kind of madhouse to a certain extent, but a better leader could do a lot better.
But who would it be? I can't see anybody in the Labour Party.
Richard Bergen?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They would
expect those same Tory voices to start
talking up Richard Bergen.
The party was desperate to elect a woman in the last time, because they still haven't managed to do it. 45 years after the Tories did, but they couldn't because the women were hopeless. If you look at the rest of the men, they're hopeless. Yeah. I don't really agree with you, Freddie. I thought Keir Starmer I didn't think he was impressive, but I thought he looked like the only one from the front bench, at least, who looked vaguely plausible as a prime minister. I think once they get rid of him, which I'm sure they will in the next year or two, I don't know where they're going to go from there.
I mean, the fact that they're now talking up Andy Burnham, who crashed and burned last time around, is so telling. I mean, I remember that leadership race when he was kind of a distant second behind Corbyn for much of it. It was so embarrassing. He didn't know what he thought. I remember him being asked what his favourite biscuit was, and he said chips and gravy because he was so desperate to up his kind of workerishness. I know the pandemic and the whole cringy King of the North thing has brought him back, but the fact that they're going back to him, it does underline the idea that even the kind of sensible, more centrist section of the Labour Party, it's not that interesting to bang on about just talent and nous, but there's not much of it, surely.
We should talk about Angie Mania a bit and Angela Rayner. And I mean, the scum comment, the fact that the scum comment dominated the news agenda for 3 days says a lot about the state of Labour. I mean, the reason why people are excited about her is she seems to have personality. But that's a sort of very metropolitan media idea of what personality is, particularly working. But, they think, oh, that's working class. She used the word scum, and that's literally how people who run a lot of the media in this country think. So, no, I think, there are no good. You're right, Chris. There are no good options for Labour at the moment. And Lisa Nandy, people are getting excited about her now because she gave a reasonably good speech. I don't know if she's the answer. I very much doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well because even the people like Angela Rayner, like you say, who are kind of talked up as these authentic working class voices, they still have to toe the line or just naturally toe the line of all the crazy identitarian stuff, suggesting that saying that only women have cervixes is the equivalent of saying Heil Hitler or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I think Labour are going down a kind of Lib Dem route into irrelevance, I mean, it's very weird to say it, but just on the Spectator website this week, like the interest in we ran some very good pieces, I should add, about the Labour conference, but there's just not a lot of interest in it. People are like not excited either way.
You can't blame them. Irrelevance definitely seems to be the byword of the day. Are you looking for the perfect gift for the pro-freedom, anti-woke person in your life? Then look no further than the Spiked shop. You can now get your favourite Spiked slogan on a t-shirt, hoodie, tote bag or mug, including ban nothing, question everything, love Europe, hate the EU, and cancel culture. Plus, if you're a Spiked supporter, you can get a 15% discount off of everything. Just go to spiked-online.com/shop to browse our items and make your purchases. That's spiked-online.com/shop. Chris, we should do some Nanny State stories.
Yeah, let's do that.
Of course. So let's start off with this new potential crackdown on gambling at football. So ads on football shirts, on pitchside hoardings, all the rest of it. It's something that's kind of been in the offing for a while, a lot of noise from campaign groups and all the rest of it. But what's the new developments?
Right. So there's a gambling review. The government is consulting, I think has consulted now, and it will have to publish its findings from that at some point this year. And once you had the whole fixed odds betting terminal issue resolved in favour of the anti-gambling fanatics, inevitably they came back with a whole another list of demands. And as is often the case with nanny statists, advertising was quite high up there. So they really want a total ban on advertising and sponsorship. But the government, apparently, and these are only kind of government sources at the moment, but it's probably right, the government, it seems, minded to ban gambling sponsorship on Premiership football shirts, specifically Premiership football shirts, and possibly the hoardings in the Premiership. And apparently the reason they only want to go for the Premiership is that they are quite rightly concerned about the financial effects on the lower leagues. And this is, apart from anything else, terrible politics, I think. It's the kind of thing Theresa May would have done. Because I think the government knows that actually what irks a lot of people about football sponsorship is there's just seems to be a lot of it at the moment. For last few years, there's been a lot of it. The reason for that is there's loads of these companies. They all want to establish themselves as, respectable brands. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't go on forever anyway, because a lot of these they'll go bust or they'll be merged. But for the time being, the last few years, there's been loads of them. And like about half of the championship sides were sponsored by gambling companies last year, I think. And not far off in the Premiership. So because they know that the public, insofar as they care about this at all, just thinks there's a lot of it, right? And I don't mind you banning it because the public don't care about banning things generally. The government's going, okay, well, we'll ban it in the Premiership. Then it won't be on Match of the Day and everyone will be happy again. Well, of course, nobody's going to be happy again. Well, the anti-gambling people won't be anyway, and they're the ones who can. And also, you are essentially conceding the point, right? Which is the anti-gambling people think that kids or anybody else watches Match of the Day, sees the Bet365 logo, and goes off and becomes a incorrigible problem gambler for the rest of their lives. That's the reason they say they want to ban it. The government is just, I think, trying to calm this down a bit by getting rid of the most visible element of it. But there is no way you can logically make the case for just banning it in the Premiership. Clearly, right? If you think it's so bad that it has to be banned, you've got to ban it across every sport, let alone every blooming league in the football league. So it's really bad politics. They're obviously not going to appease anybody by doing this. They've already implicitly conceded that they think gambling sponsorship is in some way pernicious, and so I think we're now going to see this slippery slope, and you'll end up with everyone, including the local Sunday league side that's sponsored by the local bookie, being penalised by this. And as the government has kind of conceded, that is actually really bad financially. The amount of money it's going to take out of sport, and snooker in particular, which is the one I care most about, it's going to ruin snooker. And I can't bear to see them do this again after it's only just recovered from the bloody tobacco sponsorship ban.
Freddie, what do you make of all this? Especially all this sort of paternalism coming from the Tory party.
I think it is odd, isn't it? Because, I mean, you think that you thought people for a long time, the high street bookie, and it was really what it was middle class people just a little bit disgusted by the fact that there were high street bookies, and some common people might be in there, And
it was the visibility again as well.
It was the visibility.
It was the fact
exactly.
they went on the high streets.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. So now the visibility, the closest thing to visibility is the shirts, and the suspicion, which is true, that there's enormous amounts of money going into gambling. And I just think what's the old Puritan line about the suspicion that someone somewhere might be having fun. And I think here it's like the suspicion that someone sort of poor who shouldn't be having fun might be having fun, or someone who should be being more responsible with their money is being irresponsible with their money. And it's gross. I mean, I say this as a sort of bit of a gambling addict myself, who's very concerned about the clampdown. But I think it's people like gambling. I don't see. I think it is bad for you. It's been bad for me, definitely. But it depresses me that this is something that the Tories are taking so seriously, because for a long time it was the sort of Corbynista side. It was Matt Zarb cousins, or it's called, leading this kind of absolute warfare on what they thought for what they thought was the working class, but it's actually anti the working class.
Yeah,
I think
fixed odd betting terminals were his big
fobs.
Yeah,
poor old fobs.
Yeah,
they were brilliant.
Oh, did you used to play them?
Yeah. I mean, I say they were brilliant. They you could lose quite a lot of money quite quickly, but they were good fun for a bit. I don't think that was the source of my online gambling is a much better. I don't want to get into my confessional mode.
You can share here as much as you want.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I once
very caring audience, but
I've written about it. It's not. It was not good for a while, but now I buy NFTs instead, which is even more gambling. Well,
we should do a discussion about those at some point, just so someone can explain to me what they are. But that's for another. Chris, the other story you wanted to talk about was the WHO choosing the UK as the global lead on sugar and calorie reduction network, which is very exciting. So do you want to tell us a bit about this?
Yeah.
Badge of pride.
So, I mean, we talked about on the podcast before about the food reformulation thing and how it just hasn't worked at all, and it's just led to various food products becoming a bit smaller and less tasty. By the way, I finally got my hands on some Iron Brew 1901 the other day. Absolutely superb.
So this is the original recipe,
supposedly the original recipe, right? From 1901.
But they found it in an attic or something.
Different to the one that they discontinued.
When you say you got your hands on it, how do you get your hands on it?
It's not easy if you don't live in Scotland. They had a load of it. They did a promo in my local co-op. I haven't seen it since, unfortunately, but I got hold of a big bottle of it, and it was really nice. Probably better than the one they discontinued. Anyway, point is, it wrecked a load of brands and didn't do anything because in terms of health, because it had no effect on sugar consumption. It was mainly sugar reduction. They were going for with the food reformulation thing. Actually, people consume more sugar. God bless the British public. They're just up there to make up for the kind of reduction in the size.
You buy 2 of these tiny chocolate bars.
We had large increases like in 2019, which is the crucial year before they got to their 2020 target. Massive increase in British consumption of biscuits and things like that. Fantastic stuff. Anyway, it didn't work. It was a complete flop. Public Health England's getting closed down anyway. Like this week, October the 1st, it's finally going. Unfortunately, to be replaced by a carbon copy called the Office for Health Promotion and Disparities. I think it's against the disparities, actually. But anyway.
It's not trying to maintain the disparities.
So it was a perfect time to drop this terrible idea, right? But rather than drop it, they are rolling out around the world with the World Health Organization, which is the only health agency that can claim to be even less competent than Public Health England, particularly on COVID. So this, a terrible duo of health organizations have effectively hooked up. But the worst thing about it was that the government, poor old Sajid Javid, I think he must have had a gun to his head, but he had to say what a wonderful thing that this was. But they made out this as a benefit of Brexit because the WHO European region, which is who they're partnering with, has got more countries in it than the EU. They made this point twice in the press release. Like, there's not this like poxy 27 countries, but at least 50 countries in Europe are going to be shrinking chocolate bars and making soft drinks.
That is what people voted for.
Taking back control.
Or straight bananas and tiny whiskers.
That's the smaller chocolate bars.
I mean, it was interesting hearing the Department of Health talk about it, as you say, it's like part of global Britain. Why is it always global Britain? Is always the terrible stuff. So it's making people not have sugar. It's staying in Afghanistan. It's, making everyone do eco-austerity next Thursday. That seems to be what global Britain
rejoin.
I've started to reconsider. Hi, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. And if you are, why not take a second to leave us a rating and a review with your podcast provider? It takes just 30 seconds and is a great way to help us reach new people. Now, on with the show. Speaking of global Britain, Boris Johnson was in the US recently, Freddie. And so British people, I think it's fair to say, since Trump's left, we're not paying as much attention as we might to Joe Biden. So we might have missed some of the level of crisis that seems to have sort of surrounded him. So, of course, there was the whole Afghan debacle. There's also this migrant crisis which he's been dealing with, and just soaring violent crime, all kinds of things which just seem to completely give the lie to this idea that the adults had returned and that he was stability and normalcy and all the rest of it. Do you want to tell us a bit about what's been going on and how bad things are looking for Biden at the moment?
Well, he's a disaster. That's pretty obvious. And the polls show it. He had this post-Trump honeymoon, and people were relieved. Trump was exhausting. Someone who covered it quite a lot. It was exhausting just trying to just follow the shit aggro all the time. And then Biden's, came in with a level of goodwill, sort of general idea he was a decent man, particularly in contrast to Trump, etc., and massive backing from most of the media. But he's been terrible. And the reason why and it's not very nice to say it, is that he's not all there. He's just not mentally all there. I met him last year in February, and I asked him what his approach to, because I couldn't think of anything else there. So what would your approach to Brexit Britain be and Boris Johnson? And he genuinely had no idea what I was talking about. So, I mean, I think he's just, they could sort of get him ready to do a speech. He can just about get through a speech. They cut him off from all questions. And so you have this very, very weird kind of Potemkin presidency where, he sort of wheeled out certain occasions, wheeled away at other occasions. And then with the Boris White House meeting, I mean, they were very cross. The White House were very, very angry that Boris at the end said, why don't we take some questions? And that wasn't planned. And you could sort of sense the panic. I wasn't there, but I was told you could sense the panic in the room, that everyone was like, oh my God, they might ask him a question. And he'd already done this weird little sort of ramble about Amtrak, which has been proven to be untrue before, which he's done about how many miles he's done on Amtrak, because he's very proud of the fact he used to commute a lot. It's a very, very weird situation. And in a way, it's more fascinating than the Trump presidency, but it's in a very deeply depressing way, because you've got this man, everybody knows he's not right, and yet there he is leading the free world. And people go, oh, well, Reagan was Gaga. And you think, yeah, but he ended Gaga. He didn't start. Sort of not knowing what's going on. And my dad gets very cross with me every time I say this, because he's quite old. He's like, look, we all go old. You're being very mean towards me. And I don't want to be mean, but it does seem worrying that the leader of the free world can't take questions because he's a rambling old man.
Is he too old, Chris, do you think? Should we put an age limit on the...
well, it's not good, is it, that we've had so many presidents who are in their 70s.
Yes.
Trump was in his 70s. If Trump comes back and wins, which I think he may well do, he'll be, what, 78? About the same age as Biden? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It does suggest there's a lack of talent lower down. And I don't think anyone would say Biden and Trump are the greatest talents in the respective parties at the best of times. So something has gone wrong. But then you look at the younger generation, and a lot of them are kind of lunatics as well. It's a bit like with the Labour Party, I guess you could say. There's just not that much talent coming through, as far as I can see. But I don't know that much about.
I think that's exactly politics. You win because of who you're not. So Biden won because Biden won the Democratic nomination because he wasn't the radical left.
And Trump because he wasn't.
And he won the presidency because he wasn't Trump. And then Trump because he wasn't the classic establishment. So no one wins for being anything other than what they negate.
And nearly anybody else in the country would have been Trump, and nearly anybody else in the country would have been Biden. So how do we end up with the two worst people in the country fighting off for the presidency?
We could say we're heading towards civilizational death.
Absolutely.
It's worth remembering, though, Freddie, isn't it? Like the level of excitement that Biden and Harris kind of elicited from the US media. I mean, the gushing on cable news, on liberal cable news, was hilarious.
Yes.
I mean, there was one, I think it was on CNN, he likened the lights lining the National Mall to Joe Biden's arms reaching out into America. They were kind of, it was kind of North Korea, sub-North Korea type stuff. And all this stuff about normalcy, the adults in the room, that was kind of what they were. But what do people mean when they say that? Because, Joe Biden is attached to everything that seemingly had led to Trump. All the crises, financial crisis, all these foreign wars that led in nothing but disaster. What do you think people were sort of yearning for, I guess, when they made this guy sound like such a hero?
I think there's a yearning for the Obama moment, and the problem is Biden's not Obama. It's very obvious he's not Obama. He's not a charismatic speaker.
You forgot Obama's name a couple of times in the campaign trail, which was very good.
He's forgotten a lot of it. Yeah. My favourite was Scott Morrison last week with the fella from Down Under. No, I think so. And because a lot of Biden's administration are ex-Obama people, they want to sort of revisit the playbook. And the playbook is hope. The good guys are in charge again. And the playbook also, I think, is increasingly, it doesn't matter if we lose the midterms because we can just say Republicans are stopping us. And that's what Obama did quite effectively in the second term, was always say, I would be healing the country. I would be making Obamacare work if it wasn't for these dastardly Republicans stopping me at every turn. And so if they do lose the midterms, it's obviously bad for the Democratic Party in many ways, but it's also good for the Biden administration because, it's tough having a majority because people expect you to get stuff done. And if you're as incompetent as they are, you're not going to get that done.
So why is Biden so unpopular, aside from the possible suspected dementia?
He's still liked. I think people think he's a good guy and he's got a sort of silent generation, nice guy aura about him. I think there is a growing suspicion about the lack of questions. I mean, it's very weird that he's only had one proper press conference since he's been president. And I think inflation is really starting to bite. And, he got the easy bit done, which was the mega bills, all the American plan, jobs plan, infrastructure plan, so on. Well, he hasn't got the infrastructure plan through, but, it's very easy when you're promising and actually sending cash out to every American citizen. People quite like that. But then as inflation starts to bite, which it really is now, people are finding their lives are getting harder. And, the post-Trump honeymoon is over, as I said. I think people just realize they've almost by accident elected someone pretty rubbish.
And just because Chris raised it, before we go, Trump and another run, do you think that's on the cards? Do you think he would actually make some headway? Or is all of the kind of craziness of his final days, full season landscaping or whatever it was, and
I'm just because
all of the conspiracy theories.
I'm just going to have a top up.
No, please do.
I think he'll run again.
Can he win without being on Twitter? Do you think?
No, I think possibly not. My sense is, and Trump has proven everybody who thought he was finished wrong a lot of times. But I think he is somebody who is going to run again because he has to, because his whole sort of universe, almost his financial universe now, is dependent on the grift of running. So
his financial universe.
Yeah, well, because he's obviously very rich, but the Trump family is now kind of addicted to these mail outs where you get this sort of, I'm on their mail out list. You get this kind of like, we've got 12 seconds to save the republic, and they can, and it's the law of diminishing returns. Like they're
critical
getting less
race
and less
theory
effective.
is about to kill your grandmother.
The emails are getting more and more desperate. So no, I think he'll run again because there's just too many people with too much to lose from him not running again.
And how would he do it?
I think at the moment you'd have to say probably still would be a favourite, but I do think level of interest in him is going down, like the amount of attention he can command. And this is partly to do with the social media ban. I suspect if it were to happen this year, you'd still say he'd have to be a favourite. I think by 2023, 24, I think my prediction, and I'm more than willing to say I've got this wrong before, is that he will have become a bit irrelevant.
So on that note, I think we'll end. So Freddie, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to Last Orders. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please do take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. And if you'd like to support the show, why not become a Spiked supporter? Just go to spiked-online.com/supporters to sign up. That's spiked-online.com/supporters.